The stars stretched far and wide across the dark expanse of space, and yet some places were still untouched. The starbound horizon, a ship from Earth, glided silently through the vastness, its crew on a routine mission. But for Captain Alina Brace, this journey was anything but ordinary. Commander Alina had always felt a pull to explore the unknown, to seek out the stories that lay hidden in the corners of the galaxy. When the distress signal had first come through, weak and broken, she was the first to notice. It wasn't like the usual emergency calls they received from nearby ships or colonies. This one was different. There was a desperation in it, a kind of hopelessness that tugged at Alina's heart. The message was simple. Help. Please help. We are alone. The signal had been drifting for years, faint and almost lost. But the starbound horizon had its powerful sensors, able to pick up even the smallest signal, no matter how far it traveled. As the ship followed the coordinates, Alina felt a strange mix of excitement and concern. The galaxy was a big place, and there were countless civilizations, but not all of them were friendly. What kind of species was calling for help? What had happened to them? The crew of the starbound horizon wasn't prepared for what they would find. The ship reached the moon, orbiting a dying star. It was a desolate place, covered in dark gray dust, with no signs of life. Alina's heart sank as they landed, stepping out into the cold, airless world. The signal had come from here, but where were the beings who had sent it? Then, as they explored, they found them. Small, fragile creatures, huddled together in shelters made of scrap metal and stone. They were not like any species Alina had seen before. The aliens were no taller than a meter, their skin covered in smooth, shimmering exoskeletons. Their eyes were large and expressive, filled with a mixture of curiosity and fear. They didn't have weapons or armor, only their fragile bodies. The Threxians, as the creatures were called, looked like they had been forgotten by time itself. The human crew couldn't help but feel a deep sadness as they approached them. These beings had been abandoned, left to fend for themselves in a cruel and unforgiving universe. Alina spoke to one of the Threxians, using a translator device. It was slow at first, the words stumbling out like a foreign language. But eventually, the meaning became clear. They had once been a proud species, with a rich culture and a thriving civilization. But that was before the supernova destroyed their homeworld. Their planet had been in the path of the dying star, and their people had been scattered, left to survive however they could. The Threxians had called out for help, but no one had come. Other species in the galaxy had simply ignored them, seeing no value in aiding such a small, weak species. They had been abandoned to their fate. Why didn't they help? One of the crew members, Lieutenant James, asked, his voice full of disbelief. They were just left here to die. Alina felt her heart tighten at the question. She couldn't understand how other species could ignore the suffering of these innocent beings. It was a harsh reminder of how the galaxy often worked. The powerful ignored the weak, the advanced looked down on those who weren't as evolved or capable. But Alina wasn't like that. She believed in fairness and compassion, and she wasn't about to let the Threxians suffer any longer. "We're not leaving," she said firmly, her voice steady. "We'll help them. We'll find a way." The crew members exchanged uncertain glances. Some of them felt uneasy about getting involved in a situation that seemed so hopeless. They had their mission, exploration and research, but this was something else entirely. Helping a species no one cared about seemed like a waste of resources to some. "But Captain," Lieutenant James continued, "we're not equipped for this. We don't have the resources to bring back an entire species from the brink of extinction." "I know," Alina replied, "but we can't just walk away. We have to try. We're human, and we help when others won't." And so, with that simple promise, Alina made her decision. She would protect the Threxians, no matter the cost. The crew would have to adjust, and the mission would take a new direction. But this was no longer about exploration. It was about doing the right thing. As the team made plans to help the Threxians, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that they had found something more important than they could have ever imagined. In the middle of a vast, uncaring universe, they had found a species in need of help, and no matter how small or fragile they were, Alina would not let them be forgotten again. The starbound horizon hovered above the bleak surface of the moon, its lights casting long shadows on the ground below. The crew had set up a small camp near the alien shelters, but their focus was on the Threxians. These creatures, fragile and small, were unlike any species the humans had encountered before. Despite their weakness, there was something resilient about them, a quiet strength that seemed to shine through their sorrow. Alina stood among them, her heart heavy with a sense of responsibility. The Threxians had been through so much, yet they had not given up. They had survived on this lonely moon for years, clinging to life in the face of certain extinction. It was a remarkable display of courage, but one that had gone unnoticed by the rest of the galaxy. The Threxians had been living in makeshift shelters, built from metal scraps and pieces of broken technology. They had no advanced tools or weapons, only their hands and their will to survive. Their once thriving civilization was now nothing more than a distant memory, and they had no means of communication beyond their basic distress signal. Yet even in their situation, they had managed to build a community, however small and fragile it was. Alina watched as one of the Threxians, a slender creature with translucent skin that shimmered in the moonlight, approached her. The creature's large, dark eyes looked up at her, and for a moment, Alina saw a flicker of hope in them. "Help," the Threxian whispered, its voice soft and melodic, yet filled with desperation. "We are alone." Alina knelt down to meet its gaze, her hand gently resting on the Threxian's fragile shoulder. She could feel the warmth of its body through the thin exoskeleton, a stark contrast to the cold of the moon's surface. It was clear that the Threxians were terrified, not just of the dangers of their world, but of being forgotten once again. For years, they had sent out signals, hoping for help that never came. Now, finally, they had found someone who cared. "I'm here," Alina said, her voice full of promise. "I won't let you be alone anymore. We will help you." The Threxian blinked, its large eyes welling with tears. It had been so long since anyone had cared enough to listen. The Threxians had been cast aside by every other civilization, seen as insignificant and weak. But now, for the first time, they had found someone who saw their worth. "Thank you," the Threxian said, its voice barely a whisper. "We have nothing left." Alina's heart broke at the words. She knew that the Threxians had lost everything: their home, their culture, their people. And yet, despite it all, they had held on. They had clung to life, believing that one day someone would come to save them. That hope had sustained them through the darkest of times. "We'll help you rebuild," Alina promised. "We'll find you a new home, a place where you can live and thrive. You won't have to survive like this anymore." The Threxian nodded, its eyes shining with gratitude. It seemed almost too good to be true, but Alina knew that she had to keep her word. She couldn't leave these beings to fend for themselves again. She turned to her crew, who had gathered around, watching the exchange with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Captain, are we sure about this?" Lieutenant James asked, his voice hesitant. "We don't have the resources to bring an entire species back from the brink. This is going to be a huge task." Alina met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. "We can't leave them behind, James. If we don't help them, no one else will. This is our responsibility now." The crew fell silent. They understood the gravity of the situation. But Alina's conviction was contagious. If they were going to save the Threxians, they would need to work together and find a way, no matter how difficult it might be. "We'll make it work," Alina said, her voice steady. "We're going to do this, no matter what it takes." As the crew began to discuss their next steps, Alina couldn't help but feel a growing sense of hope. They had come to the moon to investigate a simple distress signal, but now they had found something far greater. The Threxians weren't just a lost species, They were a reminder of what humanity stood for: compassion, kindness, the belief that no one should ever be left behind. Over the following days, the crew worked tirelessly to assess the situation. They had to find a way to provide the Threxians with food, shelter, and medical care. The resources on the starbound horizon were limited, but Alina was determined. They would figure it out. In the meantime, Alina spent more time with the Threxians, learning about their culture, their history, and the terrible loss they had suffered. She was struck by how much they had once accomplished, how advanced they had been before the disaster. And yet, despite their fall, the Threxians had never given up on hope. They were survivors. For Alina, this was more than just a rescue mission. It was a chance to prove that humanity was capable of more than just exploration and conquest. It was a chance to show the galaxy that kindness and empathy could change the universe. And with that thought, Alina made a silent vow. No matter how long it took, she would ensure that the Threxians were never forgotten again. As days passed on the desolate moon, the Starbound Horizon crew continued their work to help the Threxians. They shared what little supplies they had, built shelters, and treated the Threxians for various injuries and illnesses. But there was one thing they could not change: the deep scars left by years of neglect and abandonment. The Threxians' trust in the universe had been shattered. They had been forsaken by the very civilizations that claimed to be advanced and benevolent. To them, the galaxy was a cold and indifferent place. Alina spent most of her time with the Threxians, speaking with them through their translators, learning about their history, their culture, and their pain. The more she learned, the more her heart ached. The Threxians had once been a proud people, flourishing on their homeworld, building cities of great beauty and knowledge. But their peaceful civilization had been destroyed by a supernova that had wiped out their planet. In the aftermath, they had called out for help, sending desperate messages across the galaxy, but no one had responded. Not a single species, no powerful empire, had come to their aid. Alina found herself growing angry with every new story of rejection. She could not understand how the galaxy's most advanced civilizations could ignore the suffering of an entire species. It seemed that the Threxians had been judged not by their worth as individuals, but by their small size, their lack of advanced technology, and their inability to defend themselves. To many of the larger galactic powers, they were nothing more than an afterthought, a species too weak to matter. It was during one of these conversations with the Threxians that Alina learned more about the Council of the Galactic Union, a powerful group of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. The Council was responsible for maintaining order and peace in the galaxy, or so they claimed. But as Alina listened to the Threxian stories, it became clear that the Council's idea of order was based on power and control, not compassion. They said we were too small, one of the Threxians explained, its voice trembling with emotion. Too weak. They told us to fend for ourselves. Alina frowned, her brow furrowed in disbelief. But how could they just leave you? How could they say that? They said, the Threxian continued, that we were a species of no value, that our survival was unimportant. The words hit Alina like a slap to the face. She had always believed that the universe, though vast and full of dangers, could also be a place where kindness and empathy existed. But now she saw the ugly side of it, the side that turned its back on those who could not defend themselves, those who had no power or influence. As Alina pondered the injustice of it all, she felt a renewed sense of determination. The Threxians might have been small and fragile, but they were not insignificant. They had a culture, a history, and a story to tell. They deserved to live, to rebuild, and to thrive, just like any other species in the galaxy. Her thoughts were interrupted when Lieutenant James approached her with news. "Captain, we've received a message from the Galactic Union," he said, his voice uneasy. "They've heard about what we're doing for the Threxians, and they're not pleased." Alina's heart sank. She had known that helping the Threxians would not be easy, But she had hoped that the larger powers in the galaxy might at least acknowledge the moral responsibility to help. "What does it say?" Elena asked, her voice calm but tense. "They're calling it a waste of resources," James replied. "They've made it clear that the Threxians aren't worth the trouble. And they're threatening consequences if we continue this mission." Elena's fists clenched at her sides. She had expected resistance, but not from the very people who were supposed to uphold peace and justice. It was clear now that the Galactic Union's version of peace was a selfish one, a peace built on the suffering of those who could not fight back. "We're not backing down," Elena said firmly, her voice resolute. "This isn't about resources. This is about doing what's right." James hesitated but nodded. "Understood, Captain." The message from the Galactic Union was a harsh reminder that the galaxy was not always a place of fairness or mercy. The Union saw the Threxians as nothing more than a burden, a species too weak to save. But Elena couldn't let that stand. She couldn't allow the Threxians to be ignored again, not after all they had been through. That night, as the crew gathered in the ship's common area, Elena addressed them all. "We are here because we believe in something," she began, her voice steady and strong. "We believe that no one, no matter how small or fragile, should be left to suffer alone. We are not going to let the Threxians be forgotten again. The Union may see them as worthless, but we know better. We know that they are worthy of our help, and we will stand by them, no matter what." The crew listened in silence, their faces filled with a mix of determination and uncertainty. They knew the risks of standing up to the Galactic Union, but they also knew that what Elena was asking of them was more than just a mission. It was a statement, a declaration that compassion, not power, should define the galaxy. As the meeting ended, Elena felt a sense of peace. She knew that their path ahead would be difficult, and that the road would be full of challenges, but she also knew that they were doing the right thing. And sometimes, that was all that mattered. The days following the message from the Galactic Union were filled with tension. Elena could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. The Union's threat wasn't an empty one. They had the resources, the power, and the influence to make their lives difficult. Yet, Elena remained resolute. She had made a promise to the Threxians, and she wasn't about to break it. On the surface, life aboard the Starbound Horizon continued as normal. The crew continued to care for the Threxians, providing them with medical aid, food, and shelter. But beneath the calm exterior, there was a growing sense of unease. The crew members had begun to question whether their actions might lead to consequences they weren't prepared for. Lieutenant James, once skeptical, had grown more supportive of Elena's decision, but even he couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. As a soldier, he knew what it meant to stand against a powerful enemy. The Galactic Union was not an opponent they could easily face down. But Elena was determined. "I don't care what the Union says," she told him one evening as they stood on the observation deck, watching the stars twinkle in the distance. "We're doing what's right. We can't let fear stop us from helping them." James looked at her, his face softening. "I know, Captain. I just don't want to see you and the crew put in a position where we're forced to choose between what's right and our own safety." "I understand," Elena replied, her voice filled with a mixture of resolve and uncertainty. "But we've already chosen. The moment we decided to help the Threxians, there was no going back. We have to see this through." Meanwhile, the Threxians had begun to trust the humans more. Slowly but surely they were starting to open up, sharing more about their culture and their past. Elena learned that their civilization had once been incredibly advanced. They had created beautiful art, built cities that reached toward the skies, and developed a peaceful society. But when the supernova destroyed their homeworld, they lost everything. All that remained were the survivors, scattered across the galaxy. "What happens now?" one of the Threxians asked Elena, its voice full of uncertainty. "Can we truly rebuild?" Elena smiled gently, kneeling beside the creature. "We'll help you," she promised. "We'll find a way." But even as she spoke those words, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Threxians were not the only ones at risk. The more Elena thought about it, the more she realized that the threat from the Galactic Union wasn't just about the Threxians. It was about the very idea of helping those in need. In the eyes of the Galactic Union, the Threxians were a distraction, an inconvenience. They saw no value in aiding a species that had no power to offer in return. Elena had seen this kind of thinking before. Large, powerful civilizations that valued strength above all else. But she refused to believe that strength was the only thing that mattered. The Union's attitude toward the Threxians was a symptom of a much deeper problem. The belief that some lives were more important than others. As the days passed, the tension continued to build. Elena knew that the longer they stayed on the moon, the more likely it was that the Galactic Union would intervene. She couldn't predict how or when it would happen, but she was sure they would come. And when they did, they would come with the full force of their power. The question was, what would they do then? Elena had no intention of backing down, but she also knew that she couldn't fight the Union head-on. She wasn't a warrior. She was a captain, a leader. Her strength lay in her ability to inspire her crew, to show them that what they were doing was worth the risk. "We can't let them intimidate us," she told her crew during their next meeting. "We're not just helping the Threxians, we're showing the galaxy that compassion matters. We're making a statement, and I'm not willing to back down from that." The crew looked at one another, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. Some were still uncertain about the risks they were taking, but there was a growing sense of unity among them. They had come to see the Threxians not as a burden, but as a people deserving of compassion and a chance to rebuild. They had a duty to stand with them. "I'm with you, Captain," said James, his voice steady. "We all are." Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe they could win this fight, not with weapons or power, but with the strength of their hearts. Later that day, a new communication came through. Elena knew it could only be from one source, the Galactic Union. She gathered her crew in the command center, her stomach tight with anxiety. The message was blunt and direct. "You are advised to cease your interference with the Threxian species immediately. Failure to comply will result in consequences. The Threxians are of no importance. Your actions are a waste of resources, and we will not tolerate further resistance." Elena read the message with a calm, steady hand, though her heart raced. She looked at her crew, their faces full of anticipation. "We will not back down," she said, her voice firm. "This is not a battle we will fight with weapons. We will fight with what makes us human. Our compassion, our will to help. We are doing the right thing, and that's all that matters." With the message from the Union hanging in the air, Elena prepared herself for whatever came next. They were standing on the edge of something bigger than themselves, and they had no intention of stepping back. The days following the Galactic Union's ultimatum were filled with uncertainty. Elena and her crew knew they were on the brink of something much larger than they had ever anticipated. The starbound horizon had become more than just a ship. It was now a symbol, a beacon of hope for the Threxians, and a testament to the belief that doing what was right mattered more than following orders. Elena gathered her crew in the command center, a space that had become both a place of strategy and camaraderie. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone sat quietly, the weight of the Union's threat hanging over them like a cloud. "We're at a crossroads," Elena began, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "The Union has made it clear they want us to stop what we're doing. But we cannot turn our backs on the Threxians now. We've come this far, and we've made a promise. We will not break it." James, who had become a strong ally in this cause, stood beside her, nodding in agreement. "Captain's right. We've committed ourselves to this. We're not going to let fear stop us." The rest of the crew exchanged looks of uncertainty, but there was a quiet sense of unity in their expressions. Elena could see that they were all starting to understand the gravity of the situation. The mission was no longer just about saving the Threxians. It was about standing up for what they believed in. It was about showing the galaxy that compassion and kindness could exist, even in the cold vastness of space. But as Elena prepared to address the situation head-on, something unexpected happened. A strange, unfamiliar signal interrupted their communication systems. It was faint, garbled, and seemed to be coming from the far side of the moon. "Captain, you need to see this," Lieutenant James said, his voice filled with surprise. Elena turned to the screen, her heart racing with anticipation. The signal was growing stronger, and as it did, its message became clearer. It wasn't from the Galactic Union. It wasn't even from a known species. The voice that came through was distinctly alien, but there was something familiar in its tone, a sense of urgency and hope. "This is Commander Valor of the Zorgian fleet," the voice said. "We've received your message. We've been watching." Elena's eyes widened. The Zorgians were a race of peaceful explorers known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technology and humanitarian efforts. They were not a part of the Galactic Union, but they had often been an ally to those in need. "We have been following the plight of the Threxians," Commander Valor continued, "and we are offering our support. We believe what you are doing is not only right, it is necessary." Elena could hardly believe her ears. The Zorvians had a reputation for staying out of political conflicts, preferring to focus on helping those who needed it most. To hear that they were offering to stand with her and her crew was both unexpected and deeply moving. "Why now?" Elena asked, her voice filled with both hope and confusion. "Why haven't you intervened sooner?" There was a pause before Commander Valor replied. "We've been gathering information. We knew the Threxians had been ignored for far too long, but we also knew that if we made our move too early, it could lead to greater conflict. The Union's grip on the galaxy is strong, but now, after seeing the courage of your crew, we believe it is time to act." Elena took a deep breath, trying to absorb the weight of the situation. The Zorvians had arrived at just the right moment, and their support could change everything. With their advanced technology and experience, they could help the Threxians rebuild and provide a strong counterbalance to the Union's pressure. "We'll accept your help," Elena said, her voice resolute. "But we're not just fighting for the Threxians anymore. We're fighting for something bigger, something the galaxy needs to understand." Commander Valor's voice softened. "We understand, Captain. We stand with you in this. Together, we can show the galaxy that compassion is not a weakness. It is the strength that binds us all." Over the next few days, the starbound horizon and the Zorvian fleet began to make preparations for a new course of action. The Zorvians shared their resources and knowledge, helping the humans fortify the Threxian shelters and improve their living conditions. They also offered to assist in rebuilding the Threxian infrastructure, providing advanced technology and medical support that would allow the Threxians to thrive once more. As the crew worked alongside the Zordians, Elena felt a renewed sense of hope. The Threxians were no longer alone in the universe. They had found allies, real allies, who believed in their right to live and rebuild. The Zorvians were not just offering help, they were offering a future, one where the Threxians could once again flourish and contribute to the galaxy. But the question still loomed large. What would the Galactic Union do? Elena knew that the Union would not take kindly to this unexpected alliance. But for the first time since they had received the Union's threat, Elena felt a glimmer of confidence. The Zorvians were powerful, and their support would not go unnoticed. If the Union tried to force their hand, they would have to contend with a much larger force, one that valued life, compassion, and justice. The stage was set for a confrontation. But this time, Elena and her crew were not alone. They had an entire fleet of allies, and they were ready to stand together. The Threxians would not be abandoned again. The galaxy would learn that standing up for what was right was the true power that no empire could control. The alliance with the Zorvians had shifted the balance. Elena could feel the change in the air. The Threxians, once uncertain and fearful, were now filled with a renewed sense of hope. They were no longer alone. The Zorvians brought with them technology that could restore their devastated infrastructure. They shared their knowledge of farming, medicine, and even art. It was as if the Threxians' future was being written in real time, a future they had once believed was lost forever. But while Alina focused on the rebuilding efforts, the looming presence of the Galactic Union continued to cast a shadow over everything. The Union had not taken kindly to the Zorvian intervention. Alina knew that their efforts had drawn the Union's attention, and sooner or later they would have to face the consequences. The starbound horizon had become a symbol of defiance, but that defiance would not go unchallenged. The Union, despite its grandeur and power, was not accustomed to being opposed, especially by a small crew of humans and their newfound allies. Alina could sense the storm coming, even if it had not yet arrived. One quiet evening, as the crew worked together to refine their plans, Lieutenant James approached Alina with urgent news. "Captain, we've just received a transmission from the Union. It's a warning." Alina's heart sank. She had expected this moment to come sooner or later, but hearing those words still sent a chill down her spine. "Put it through," she said calmly. The screen flickered for a moment before a stern face appeared. It was an official of the Galactic Union, dressed in the uniform of high rank. His eyes were cold, his expression unwavering. "Captain Alina Reed," he began, his voice filled with authority. "Your actions have reached the highest levels of the Galactic Union. You and your crew are in clear violation of our directives. The Threxians are not worth the resources you are expending on them. Your decision to align with the Zorvians will have consequences. Cease your interference at once, or we will take all necessary measures to ensure compliance." Alina held the gaze of the Union official, her face hardening. The warning was clear, but she had heard it before. It was the same kind of threat that had been directed at countless others. The Union spoke of order, of stability, but it was an order that came at the cost of compassion. "We are not stopping," Alina replied firmly. "The Threxians are not a burden. They are a people with a history, a culture, and a future. We stand by them." The Union official's expression didn't change. "You are making a mistake, Captain. The Union will not tolerate insubordination." Alina could feel the weight of the threat, but she didn't flinch. She had already made her choice. "We will not be intimidated, and we will not abandon the Threxians." With that, the transmission ended, leaving Alina with a sense of resolve. The Union had made their intentions clear, but they had underestimated the human spirit, and they had underestimated the power of compassion. "Prepare for anything," Alina told her crew, her voice filled with a calm determination. "The Union will not just walk away from this, and we need to be ready for whatever comes next." The crew nodded, their faces a mixture of concern and determination. They had come this far together, and they knew the stakes were high. But Alina had earned their trust. They were ready to follow her, no matter the cost. As the starbound horizon continued its work with the Threxians, Alina kept an eye on the skies. The Union might be watching, but so were others. The Zorvian fleet, though small in comparison to the Union's might, had been a crucial ally. Together, they had already accomplished so much, but the Union would not be easily deterred. They would come, Alina knew that. And when they did, the battle would not just be for the Threxians, it would be for the very ideals that made them human. One evening, as Alina stood on the ship's observation deck, watching the stars twinkle in the distance, her thoughts drifted back to the moment when she had first made the decision to stand with the Threxians. The Union had offered them nothing. They had turned their backs on them for years. Yet in the face of all that, Alina had felt something stir deep within her, a sense of duty, of compassion, that refused to be ignored. "We've come too far to turn back now," she whispered to herself. Suddenly, the quiet of the evening was shattered by the sound of alarms. The sensors had detected something moving at incredible speed toward them. It was a ship, a large one, and it was not from the Zorvian fleet. "Captain, we're being approached by a Union warship," James reported urgently, his voice tense. They're coming in fast. Alina's heart raced. This was it. The Union had come to enforce their will, and the starbound horizon would have to face them head-on. But Alina was not afraid. She had the Zorvians by her side, and she had her crew, people who had already proven that they were willing to fight for what was right. "Get ready, everyone," Alina ordered. "We're not backing down." As the warship grew closer, Alina prepared for the confrontation she knew was inevitable. The stakes had never been higher, but neither had their resolve. The galaxy might have been filled with power-hungry empires and cold-hearted politics, but Alina knew that the real power lay in standing up for what was right. It was time to show the galaxy that some things were worth fighting for. The Union warship loomed large in the viewports of the starbound horizon. It was a massive, imposing vessel, its dark hull reflecting the cold emptiness of space. Alina stood at the command center, her hands steady on the controls. Her heart was racing, but her mind was clear. This moment had been coming for weeks. Now, it was here. "Captain, they've locked onto us," James reported, his voice tense but calm. "They're preparing to board." Alina nodded. She had expected this. The Union would not simply back down. They would come in full force to ensure their orders were followed. But she wasn't going to let them have it their way. Not this time. "Get the Threxians to the safe zone," Alina ordered. "We'll hold them off." The crew worked quickly, guiding the Threxians to the ship's secure sections. The Zorvian fleet, though small in comparison, had already moved into position around the starbound horizon, ready to offer support. Alina trusted them, and their presence gave her hope. Together, they could face whatever came next. The communication screen flickered to life, and once again, the cold face of the Union officer appeared. "Captain Reed," the officer said, his voice as icy as ever, "you have made a grave mistake. Surrender immediately, and we will spare your crew. Refuse, and we will take all necessary actions." Alina looked him in the eyes, her gaze unwavering. "We're not surrendering. We are standing for something bigger than ourselves. You will not force us into submission." The officer's expression hardened. "This is your final warning. Cease your interference, or you will be dealt with." The transmission ended, leaving Alina and her crew with no illusions. This was the final stand. The Union wasn't going to back down, and neither was she. "Get ready for anything," Alina said, her voice firm. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We're fighting for the Threxians, for the Zorgians, for everyone who believes in doing what's right." James gave a sharp nod, and the crew moved into position. They had prepared for this moment. They had trained for it. They were ready. As the Union warship moved into position, the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Alina could feel it in her bones. This would be a fight like no other. But she was confident. They had already won something far more important than any battle could offer, the belief that compassion was worth fighting for. The first blast from the Union ship hit the starbound horizon with a sharp jolt, shaking the entire ship. The alarms blared, and the crew scrambled to stabilize the ship. "Shields are holding," James shouted as he worked furiously at his station. Alina watched the redouts, her mind working quickly. "Keep them up as long as you can. We need to hold out long enough for the Threxians to be safe." The starbound horizon shook again as another blast struck, but this time, the shields held firm. Alina could feel the power of the Union warship, but she knew that they had something the Union didn't: unity, compassion, and the resolve to stand against injustice. The Zorvian fleet moved into position, their advanced ships surrounding the starbound horizon in a protective formation. Though smaller in size, the Zorvian ships were equipped with technology that allowed them to quickly counter the Union's attacks. "We're not alone in this," Alina whispered to herself. She could feel the strength of her crew, the Threxians, and the Zorvians all working together, their fates intertwined in a single moment. Another blast from the Union ship rocked the starbound horizon, but this time, the shields began to flicker. Alina's heart pounded in her chest. They couldn't hold out forever. She needed to make a move, one that would ensure they survived. "Lieutenant, open a channel to the Union ship," Elena ordered. James hesitated. "Captain, they're not going to listen to us. They'll just—" "Do it," Elena interrupted, her voice firm. James quickly complied, and within moments, the Union officer appeared again, his expression as stern as ever. "What is it, Captain?" the officer asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "We're not leaving," Elena said, her voice steady. "But we're not here to fight. We're here to show you that there's another way." The officer sneered. "You think you can talk your way out of this? The Union doesn't negotiate with rebels." "This isn't about rebellion," Elena replied, her voice unwavering. "This is about standing up for what's right. We're here to help the Threxians rebuild, not to take anything from the Union. We're asking for one thing, to be allowed to help, to do what's right." There was a long pause, and Elena could see the officer's expression falter, just for a moment. Then, with a cold final glance, he ended the transmission. "I'll give you one last chance to comply," he said, before the screen went dark. Elena exhaled, her mind racing. This was it. The Union was not going to back down, but neither would they. She had no more time to waste. With a swift motion, Elena made a decision. "Lieutenant, prepare for evasive maneuvers," she ordered. "We'll give them one last chance to see that we're not going to fight. We're here to protect the Threxians, and we're not going to stop." The crew sprang into action, and as the Union warship advanced, the starbound horizon moved with surprising speed, dodging the incoming fire. Elena's resolve was clear. She wasn't just fighting for her crew. She was fighting for the Threxians, the Zorgians, and every civilization that had been ignored, abandoned, or oppressed. She wasn't backing down, and neither was humanity.